I always think of the film Rocky, the American movie made by Sylvester Stallone. Peter is to the story of Jesus like Rocky is to the people of Philadelphia. In a way, a kind of loser, somebody who is the last person you'd think of as a hero, and yet this guy emerges by the end of the story as somebody who represents what Christianity is all about.
The Great Dome of St. Peter's dominates the Rome skyline. Each year, millions come to the Basilica on the Vatican Hill, said to be built over the grave of the disciple Peter, the one Jesus named the Rock, on which he would build his church. Some come to share their devotion, some out of curiosity to the place from which Christianity spread throughout the world. Peter is believed to be the one chosen by Jesus as his representative on earth, the one entrusted with the keys to the kingdom of heaven.
Peter was the first pope, the first among all of the bishops, and Peter is thus important as what we would call the vicar of Christ.
According to tradition, Peter left Jerusalem to join the Apostle Paul in the center of the Roman imperial state. But nowhere in the Bible is there any mention that Peter went to Rome. And if he did come here, where's the evidence? The search begins in 312 AD, when two provincial generals, Constantine and Maxentius, were fighting to become emperor. Their armies met at the Milvian Bridge just outside Rome itself. The night before the battle, Constantine saw a vision. A burning cross in the sky with the first two letters of Christ's name written in Greek. The next day, Maxentius's army was defeated. As a tribute to his victory, Constantine decided to build a huge basilica directly over the place Christians believed that Peter was buried. But it wasn't a simple task. The grave was on the side of a hill.
St. Peter was buried in a cemetery that ran along the southern slope of the Vatican Hill. And so to build the basilica there, Constantine had to literally cut the top off the Vatican Hill. And he had to move 1 million cubic feet of earth to do it.
And so he went to enormous expense and enormous effort, which he would not have done had he not been absolutely convinced that someone of the import of Peter was buried there.
The strength of Christian tradition is convincing, but not conclusive. There is, however, physical evidence underground. The whole of Rome is built on a base of soft volcanic rock, easy to excavate. Beneath the city streets, miles and miles of catacombs were carved out to make underground graveyards. The narrow tunnels and passageways are filled with elaborate mausoleums and vaults for the rich, and simple niches for the poor.
What we have in the catacombs is a rather inexpensive and convenient way of burying a lot of people in a very small area. Because if you think of it, cemeteries occupy space, it takes money to buy that space, and if you can then descend through several levels, and in some catacombs there are even 4 levels from the top, you're able to bury a much larger number of people than would be the case if you're relying upon surface burial.
Beneath the floor of the church of Santa Domitilla, archaeologists made an intriguing discovery. 1st century frescoes, painted onto wet plaster. Professor Philip Esler believes their value is more than decorative.
In Rome in the 1st century, there was a very strong tradition of accurate post-mortem portraiture. Many Romans wanted to have very correct and meticulously accurate portraits of themselves preserved to be located in their tombs after death. If you look at this image of Peter here, which is basically a square face, fair hair, a big square jaw with a full beard, it's exactly the same picture that you'll find on every icon of Peter from this day right back to that. Now, my own view is that this is actually the representation of what Peter looked like.
"2,000 years of tradition and a 1st century image strengthens the case for Peter having been in Rome. But the most compelling evidence was found literally under the Vatican's feet. In 1939, archaeologists excavating below the floor made an amazing discovery. They uncovered an underground street lined with magnificent 1st century tombs. Hundreds of years before, Constantine packed them with soil to make a level foundation for his basilica. Then at one end, archaeologists uncovered a wall and a grave. It was directly beneath the altar and had all the hallmarks of the grave of Peter.
They discovered that this grave had been covered by the Christians with a series of coins by pilgrims over the centuries. Over 1,300 coins were discovered on top of this grave.
Beside the grave, archaeologists found human bones, but they belonged to more than one individual. Then in 1956, a second investigation raised new hopes that this was Peter's grave after all.
A Roman epigraphist, a specialist in ancient inscriptions by the name of Margherita Guarducci, was brought in to try and decipher and analyze the graffiti that the Christian pilgrims had left on the buttressing wall built above Peter's grave. And as she began to analyze this graffiti, she noticed that there was a small niche called a localus, or a burial spot, that had been carved into this wall. And she asked the workmen of the Vatican what originally had sat in this particular localus, in this burial niche. The workmen at the time said, oh, that had been a set of bones that during the excavations had simply been cleared away and boxed along with all the other extra bones that had been discovered during the excavations, and it was sitting in a storeroom beneath the basilica.
An anthropological examination revealed that these bones were from the 1st century, and they came from a single individual. Traces of earth showed they'd been buried in the ground, not a tomb. These were the remains of a man in his 60s or his 70s. It was the right age for Peter. Then a further discovery left little doubt just whose bones these were.
These bones had been wrapped in a cloth made out of purple and gold and placed in this little niche, this little localus, which was lined with marble. So obviously it was a sign of great respect. And inside of this niche, above the bones, there was another set of Christian graffiti that had been written. 2 words in Greek, Petrus eni, Peter is within.
The Catholic Church returned the bones to their original resting place, beneath the altar at the heart of the Basilica in Rome. The evidence so far suggests that Peter was in Rome, but we don't know why he came here, or how he came to be named head of the Christian Church. To discover that, we have to find out more about Peter and the environment in which he lived. Peter was the fisherman that Jesus found in a poor community in Galilee. The traditional image of 1st century life here is humble fishermen living a hand-to-mouth existence in a rural backwater. But when archaeologists began to dig in Galilee, a very different picture of Peter and his community began to emerge.
Galilee was an active hub trade center, commerce. Goods in large quantities were shipped and rapidly over well-made roads. Fleets of boats on the Sea of Galilee, which is also known as Kinneret Lake. So this was a world of commerce, a world of cities, as well as a world of agriculture and small towns and villages and hamlets.
So Galilee may not have been a rural backwater at all. In fact, many scholars believe it was much more than that.
They were not in a rustic environment and marginalized from the rest of the world, but in fact were part of a cosmopolitan that was very much part of the Roman Empire in the east. And Galilee and Judea to the south were regarded by the Romans as the cornerstone of the eastern part of their empire.
Galilee offers further clues about Peter's life. On the northern shores lie the ruins of a fishing village called Capernaum. In the center is a house, which for centuries has been a Christian place of worship. Historians are convinced that it was Peter's house.
Why would they venerate a particular house in Capernaum? The evidence would suggest that very early on they believed it was Peter's house, and eventually built a shrine, eventually built a church, and continued to build and expand on the site for centuries.
Peter's house tells us a huge amount about his economic status. The house consisted of a courtyard surrounded by rooms, the largest of which was 8 meters by 9 meters. This was a superior house, with a floor made of basalt stone. The Gospels say that Peter was married and had children. This house was large enough for a whole family.
This was a house that I would have to regard as middle class. It would accommodate an extended family. It was a prime piece of property in relationship to the Sea of Galilee. So I don't think Peter was a poor fisherman.
More information about Peter's economic status came to light in 1985, after a severe drought. As the sea level dropped, it revealed artifacts that had been hidden for thousands of years. Archaeologists digging at Ginosar on Galilee's northwestern shore found the remains of a 1st century boat which had been preserved by silt and mud. The dimensions were similar to those given in the Bible for Peter's boat.
This boat would have required at least 12 people to handle it. So you couldn't be a poor fisherman from a single family and operate a fishing vessel like this. It strongly suggests that Peter